The Outer Hebrides, also known as the Western Isles, Innse Gall of the Long Island, is an island chain off the west coast of mainland Scotland. The islands are geographically coextensive with Comhairle and Eilean Siar, one of the 32 unitary council areas of Scotland. They form part of the Hebrides, separated from the Scottish mainland and from the Inner Hebrides by the waters of the Minch, the Little Minch and the Sea of the Hebrides. Scottish Gaelic is the predominant spoken language, although in a few areas English speakers form a majority. Most of the islands have a bedrock formed from ancient metamorphic rocks and the climate is mild and oceanic. The 15 inhabited islands have a total population of 27,400 and there are more than 50 substantial uninhabited islands. From Barra Head to the Butt of Lewis is roughly 210 kilometers. There are various important prehistoric structures, many of which predate the first written references to the islands by Roman and Greek authors. The Western Isles became part of the Norse kingdom of the Southrea, which lasted for over 400 years until sovereignty was transferred to Scotland by the Treaty of Perth in 1266. Control of the islands was then held by clan chiefs, principal of whom were the MacLeods, MacDonalds, Mackenzies and MacNeils. The Highland clearances of the 19th century had a devastating effect on many communities and it is only in recent years that population levels have ceased to decline. Much of the land is now under local control and commercial activity is based on tourism, crofting, fishing, and weaving. Sea transport is crucial and a variety of ferry services operate between the islands and to mainland Scotland. Modern navigation systems now minimize the dangers but in the past the stormy seas have claimed many ships. Religion, music and sport are important aspects of local culture, and there are numerous designated conservation areas to protect the natural environment. Geography. The main islands form an archipelago of which the major islands include Lewis and Harris, North Uist, Benbecula, South Uist, and Barra. Lewis and Harris has an area of 217,898 hectares and is the largest island in Scotland and the third largest in the British Isles, after Great Britain and Ireland. It incorporates Lewis in the north and Harris in the south, both of which are frequently referred to as individual islands. Although they are joined by a land border, the island does not have a common name in either English or Gaelic and is referred to as Lewis and Harris, Louis with Harris, Harris with Lewis, etc. The largest islands are deeply indented by arms of the sea such as Loch Rog, Loch Seaforth and Loch na Madad. There are also more than 7,500 freshwater lochs in the Outer Hebrides, about 24% of the total for the whole of Scotland. North and South Uist and Lewis in particular have landscapes with a high percentage of freshwater and a maze and complexity of loch shapes. Harris has fewer large bodies of water but innumerable small lochans. Loch Langavat on Lewis is 11 kilometers long, and has several large islands in its midst, including Eilean Siar. Although Loch Suenabal has only 25% of the Langavat's surface area, it has a mean depth of 33 meters and is the most voluminous on the island. Of Loch Swadabar on North Uist it has been said that there is probably no other loch in Britain which approaches Loch Scadavé in irregularity and complexity of outline. Loch By is South Uist's largest loch and at 8 kilometers long it all but cuts the island in two. Much of the western coastline of the islands is Comhairle, a fertile low-lying dune pastureland. Louis is comparatively flat, and largely consists of treeless moors of blanket peat. The highest eminence is Innse Gall at 574 meters in the southwest. Most of Harris is mountainous, with large areas of exposed rock and cliff. The archipelago's only core but reaches 799 meters in height. North and South Uist and Benbecula have sandy beaches and wide cultivated areas of Macaire to the west and virtually uninhabited mountainous areas to the east. The highest peak here is Ben Mhor at 620 meters. The Uists and their immediate outliers have a combined area of 74,540 hectares. This includes the Uists themselves and the islands that link to them by causeways and bridges. Barra is 5,875 hectares in extent and has a rugged interior, surrounded by Macaire and extensive beaches. Flora and fauna. Much of the archipelago is a protected habitat including both the islands and the surrounding waters. There are 53 sites of special scientific interest, of which the largest are Loch and Dhu in North Uist at 15,100 hectares and North Harris, which is 12,700 hectares in extent. Loch Druid Beg on South Uist is a national nature reserve owned and managed by Scottish Natural Heritage. The reserve covers 1,677 hectares across the whole range of local habitats. Over 200 species of flowering plants have been recorded on the reserve, some of which are nationally scarce. South Uist is considered the best place in the UK for the aquatic plant slender naiad, which is a European protected species. There has been considerable controversy over hedgehogs on the Uists. The animals are not native to the islands, having been introduced in the 1970s to reduce garden pests, and the spread posed a threat to the eggs of ground-nesting wading birds. In 2003, Scottish Natural Heritage undertook culls of hedgehogs in the area, although they were halted in 2007, with trapped animals now being relocated to the mainland. Nationally important populations of breeding waders are present in the Outer Hebrides, including common redshank, dunlin, lapwing and ringed plover. The islands also provide a habitat for other important species such as corncrake, hen harrier, golden eagle and otter. Offshore, basking shark and various species of whale and dolphin can be seen regularly, and the remoter islands' seabird populations are of international significance. St Kilda has 60,000 northern gannets, amounting to 24% of the world population, 49,000 breeding pairs of leech's petrel, up to 90% of the European population, and 136,000 pairs of puffin and 67,000 northern fulmar pairs, about 30% and 13% of the respective UK totals. Muley is an important breeding ground for razorbills, with 9,514 pairs, 6.3% of the European population. The bumblebee bombers Joan Ellis var. Hebridensis is endemic to the Hebrides, and there are local variants of the dark green fritillary and green-veined white butterflies. The St Kilda wren is a subspecies of wren whose range is confined to the islands whose name it bears. Population. The inhabited islands had a total population of 26,502 at the time of the 2001 census, and the 2011 figure was 27,684. During the same period, Scottish island populations as a whole grew by 4% to 103,702. The largest settlement in the Outer Hebrides is Stornoway on Lewis, which has a population of about 8,100. In addition to the major Northford and Southford causeways that connect North Uist to Benbecula via the northern of the Grimsayes, and Benbecula to South Uist, several other islands are linked by smaller causeways or bridges. Great Bernera and Scalpe have bridge connections to Lewis and Harris respectively, with causeways linking Bell's Hair and Bernray to North Uist, Eriskay to South Uist, Flordy for Helene and the southern Grimsby to Benbecula and Vatersay to Barra. This means that all the inhabited islands are now connected to at least one other island by a land transport route. Uninhabited islands. There are more than 50 uninhabited islands greater in size than 40 hectares in the Outer Hebrides, including the Barra Isles, Flannan Isles, Monarch Islands, the Shiant Isles and the islands of Loch Rog. In common with the other main island chains of Scotland, many of the more remote islands were abandoned during the 19th and 20th centuries, in some cases after continuous habitation since the prehistoric period. More than 35 such islands have been identified in the Outer Hebrides alone. On Barra Head, for example, Historic Scotland have identified 83 archaeological sites on the island, the majority being of a pre-medieval date. In the 18th century the population was over 50, but the last native islanders had left by 1931. The island became completely uninhabited by 1980 with the automation of the lighthouse. Some of the smaller islands continue to contribute to modern culture. The Muley Boat's song, although evocative of island life, was written after the abandonment of the island in 1938, and Tarnsey hosted the BBC television series Castaway 2000. Others have played a part in Scottish history. On the 4th of May 1746, the young Pretender Charles Edward Stuart had on Eilean Siar with some of his men for 4 days whilst Royal Navy vessels patrolled the Minch, smaller isles and Skerries and other island groups pepper the North Atlantic surrounding the main islands. Some are not geologically part of the Outer Hebrides, but are administratively and in most cases culturally part of Comhairle and Eilean Siar. 73 kilometers to the west of Lewis lies St Kilda, now uninhabited except for a small military base. A similar distance to the north of Lewis are North Rona and Sulicigia, two small and remote islands. While Rona used to support a small population who grew grain and raised cattle, Sulicigia is an inhospitable rock. Thousands of northern gannets nest here, and by special arrangement some of the young, known as guggers, are harvested annually by the men of Ness. The status of Rockall, which is 367 kilometers to the west of North Uist, which the island of Rockall Act 1972 decreed to be a part of the Western Isles, remains a matter of international dispute. Geology. Most of the islands have a bedrock formed from Lewisian gneiss. These are amongst the oldest rocks in Europe, having been formed in the Precambrian period up to 3 billion years ago. In addition to the Outer Hebrides, they form basement deposits on the Scottish mainland west of the Moyne Thrust and on the islands of Coll and Tiree. These rocks are largely igneous in origin, mixed with metamorphosed marble, quartzite and mica schist, and intruded by later basaltic dikes and granite magma. The gneiss's delicate pink colors are exposed throughout the islands, and it is sometimes referred to by geologists as the Old Boy. Granite intrusions are found in the parish of Barvas in West Lewis, and another forms the summit plateau of the mountain Roanabal in Harris. The granite here is anorthosite, and is similar in composition to rocks found in the mountains of the Moon. There are relatively small outcrops of Triassic sandstone at Broad Bay near Stornoway. The Shiant Isles and St Kilda are formed from much later tertiary basalt and gabbros respectively. The sandstone at Broad Bay was once thought to be Torridonian or Old Red Sandstone. Climate. The Outer Hebrides have a cool temperate climate that is remarkably mild and steady for such a northerly latitude, due to the influence of the North Atlantic current. The average temperature for the year is 6 degrees Celsius in January and 14 degrees Celsius in summer. The average annual rainfall in Lewis is 1,100 mm and sunshine hours range from 1,100 to 1,200 per year. The summer days are relatively long and May to August is the driest period. Winds are a key feature of the climate and even in summer there are almost constant breezes. According to the writer W. H. Murray, if a visitor asks an islander for a weather forecast, he will not, like a mainlander, answer dry, wet or sunny, but quote you a figure from the Beaufort scale. There are gales one day in 6 at the butt of Lewis and small fish are blown onto the grass on top of 190 meters high cliffs at Barrowhead during winter storms. Prehistory. The Hebrides were originally settled in the Mesolithic era and have a diversity of important prehistoric sites. Eilean in Locho Labaton North Uist was constructed circa 3200–2800 BC and may be Scotland's earliest cranach. The Callanish stones dating from about 2900 BC are the finest example of a stone circle in Scotland. The 13 primary monoliths of between 1 and 5 meters high, creating a circumference about 13 meters in diameter. Comhairle on South Uist, the only site in the UK where prehistoric mummies have been found, and the impressive ruins of Duncarlow Broch on Lewis both date from the Iron Age. Etymology. The earliest written references that have survived relating to the islands were made by Pliny the Elder in his Natural History, where he states that there are 30 Hebrides, and makes a separate reference to Dumna, which Watson concludes is unequivocally the Outer Hebrides. Writing about 80 years later in 140–150 AD, Ptolemy, drawing on the earlier naval expeditions of Agricola, also distinguished between the Hebrides, of which he writes there were only 5, and Dumna. Dumna is cognate with the early Celtic Dumnos and means the deep sea isle. Pliny probably took his information from Pythias of Massilia, who visited Britain sometime between 322 and 285 BC. It is possible that Ptolemy did as well, as Agricola's information about the west coast of Scotland was of poor quality. Breeze also suggests that Dumna might be Lewis and Harris, the largest island of the Outer Hebrides, although he conflates this single island with the name Long Island. Watson states that the meaning of Ptolemy's Ebudai is unknown and that the root may be pre-Celtic. Murray claims that Ptolemy's Ebudai was originally derived from the Old Norse Havbredi, meaning isles on the edge of the sea. This idea is often repeated, but no firm evidence of this derivation has emerged. Other early written references include the flight of the named people from Ireland to Domon, which is mentioned in the 12th century Leborga Bala Erin and a 13th century poem concerning Ragnall mac Gofraid, then the heir to the throne of Man and the Isles, who is said to have broken the gate of Mar Domna. Mar Domna means the plain of Domna, but the precise meaning of the text is not clear. In Irish mythology, the islands were the home of the Fomorians, described as huge and ugly, and shipmen of the sea. They were pirates, extracting tribute from the coasts of Ireland, and one of the kings was in Dech mag de acute dominant. In modern Gaelic, the islands are sometimes referred to collectively as T Ellen Fardra and RH Ellen and Amui. Innse Gall is also heard occasionally, a name that was originally used by mainland Highlanders when the islands were ruled by the Norse. The individual island and place names in the Outer Hebrides have mixed Gaelic and Norse origins. Various Gaelic terms are used repeatedly. There are also several islands called Orisi from the Norse Orfiriasi, meaning tidal or ebb island.